The ruins were silent, except for the crunch of broken stones under their boots. Shadows moved across the cracked walls as the human, Daniel, stepped carefully, his eyes scanning for danger. The air smelled of dust and metal, and every corner seemed to hide something waiting to strike. Beside him, the alien girl, Lyra, moved with the grace of someone who had walked these ruins before. Her silver eyes kept darting ahead as if she was searching for something important. They had been traveling together for 3 days. The mission was simple on paper, but dangerous in reality. Find the crystal of Varen hidden deep inside the old fortress. Lyra said it could save her people from a sickness spreading fast. Daniel didn't know if he believed her completely, but he knew one thing: she needed help. And he couldn't walk away. The walls were covered in strange markings. Glowing faintly as they passed, Daniel's fingers brushed one of them, and Lyra grabbed his wrist quickly. "Don't touch anything," she whispered, her voice tense. "These ruins are full of traps, some older than my great-grandparents." Her words made him even more alert. He kept his rifle ready, eyes moving left and right. Listening to every sound, they entered a narrow hall where the floor was uneven. The air felt heavier here, and the light from their torches barely reached. The end. Daniel walked ahead, testing each step before putting his weight down. Behind him, Lyra followed, her steps light and quick. Her eyes were fixed on a spot in the distance where the hallway opened into a larger room. Suddenly, there was a sharp click. Lyra froze, looking down. Her foot had pressed against a square tile that was slightly lower than the rest. Before she could react, Daniel's instincts took over from the walls. Long metal spears shot out like lightning, aimed directly at her. Without thinking, Daniel threw himself forward, pushing her out of the way. The spears slammed into his side and back, tearing through his armor. A hot wave of pain exploded in his body, but he stayed on his feet for a moment. Blood ran down his side, warm and sticky. Lyra's scream echoed in the hall as she caught him before he could fall to the ground. "Daniel!" "No!" she cried, her hands pressing against his wounds. He could barely hear her over the pounding in his ears. The world blurred, the edges of his vision turning black. But through the haze, he felt her pulling him away from the trap's reach. Her arms were shaking, but she didn't stop. She dragged him into a small corner where the spears couldn't reach. He coughed, tasting iron in his mouth. His chest burned with every breath. Still, he managed to look at her and force a weak smile. "You're okay," he whispered. Her eyes were wide and her lips trembled. "I'm okay." "You're the one who's dying," she said. Her voice was full of panic, something he hadn't heard from her before. She tore a piece of cloth from her own sleeve and pressed it hard against his side. Daniel groaned but didn't push her away. He could feel his strength fading, his legs heavy like stone. Lyra's hands were covered in his blood, but she kept working, her breath quick and uneven. "We can't stay here," she said, glancing back toward the hall. "If more traps trigger, we're both dead." She looked smaller now, fear mixing with determination in her face. Then she slid one of his arms over her shoulders and began pulling him forward. Kea feared to leave him, to run and save herself, but the words wouldn't come out, and deep down he didn't want her to leave. They moved slowly, every step sending a sharp pain through his body. The torchlight flickered, casting strange shapes on the walls. Daniel's mind drifted in and out. He thought about why he came here in the first place. It wasn't just the mission. Somewhere between the battles and long nights on watch, he had started to care about her, and now, looking at her face inches from his, he knew he would take those spears again if it meant she lived. They reached a half-broken archway. Beyond, it was a small chamber, the ceiling low and the air damp. Lyra helped him down against the wall, then checked the entrance to make sure it was safe. Her hands shook as she returned to him. "You're not going to die here," she whispered. almost like a promise to herself. Daniel tried to answer, but his voice was too weak. He closed his eyes for a second. Hearing her breathing close by, somewhere in the darkness, something metal clicked again. Lyra tensed, her hand going to the dagger at her waist. They weren't safe yet, and deep inside, Daniel knew this was only the beginning. Daniel woke to the sound of dripping water, each drop echoing in the quiet darkness. His head throbbed, and for a moment he couldn't remember where he was. The smell of damp stone filled his lungs, and the cold surface beneath him felt rough. When he tried to move, a sharp pain shot through his side, reminding him of the spears. His eyes adjusted slowly to the faint light. Lyra was sitting only a few feet away, her back to the wall. Her silver eyes reflected the glow from a small lantern she had lit. She looked exhausted, her hair messy and streaked with dust. Her hands were still stained with his blood, but she didn't seem to care. She noticed him stirring and quickly moved to his side. "You're awake," she whispered, her voice carrying both relief and worry. He tried to speak, but coughed instead. And she brought a small flask to his lips. The water was cold, and he drank greedily. She told him they were in an old side chamber far from the main hall. She had dragged him here after the trap. Taking paths she knew from childhood stories, it was dangerous. But it was the only way to hide from whoever had set those traps. Daniel leaned back, his mind clearing little by little. "You knew about these traps," he said, his voice low. Lyra hesitated, her eyes shifting away. "I knew they existed," she admitted, "but I didn't think they would still be active. My people left this place long ago. We thought the fortress had gone dead." Her tone changed, becoming darker. "But if they're armed again, it means someone's been here recently." The weight of her words hung between them. If the traps were active, then they weren't alone in these ruins. Daniel tried to sit up, ignoring the pain in his side. Lyra pushed him back gently but firmly. "You can't move like this. You'll make the wounds worse," she said. Her hands lingered on his shoulders longer than needed. He studied her for a moment, realizing she had risked her life dragging him here. The thought made his chest tighten. He wanted to ask why she had gone so far for him. But her sudden movement cut him off. She stiffened, tilting her head as if listening to something. Daniel strained to hear it too. At first, there was nothing. Then a faint, metallic scraping sound. It was coming from the direction of the hall. They had escaped. Lyra's hand went to her dagger, her other hand reaching to dim the lantern. The room fell into a deeper shadow. Daniel could just barely make out her outline as she moved toward the entrance. The scraping grew louder, mixed with slow, deliberate footsteps. Whoever it was, they weren't in a hurry. They knew the ruins well. Daniel's grip tightened on the pistol holstered at his thigh. Pain burned in his side, but he forced himself to get ready. The sound stopped just outside the chamber. For a heartbeat, there was silence so heavy that even breathing felt loud. Then something brushed against the wall, slow and deliberate. Lyra looked back at him, her eyes asking if he could fight. He gave a small nod. A shadow moved into the archway. Tall and thin, its shape was alien, its movements cautious. Daniel's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, the figure spoke in a low, rough voice. "I can smell the human." The words were in Lyra's language, but he didn't need a translation to understand. Lyra stepped into the doorway, blocking the stranger's view of Daniel. "You have no right to be here," she said coldly. "This place belongs to my family." The shadow tilted its head, a faint glint revealing a mask or helmet. "Your family abandoned it, little sister," the voice replied. "And you've brought prey with you?" Daniel realized then who this was, someone connected to her past. Maybe even her blood. Lyra's posture didn't relax, but there was a flicker of something in her face. Guilt or fear. The stranger moved a step closer. and Daniel saw a flash of metal in his hand. Lyra's voice hardened. "Leave, now, or you won't walk out of here." The figure gave a dry laugh and stepped back into the hall. "You're already trapped," he said, his voice echoing before fading away. Lyra waited until the sound was gone before she returned to Daniel's side. Her hands trembled slightly as she relit the lantern. Daniel wanted answers. "Who was that?" he asked. She didn't look at him. "Someone who should have been dead," she murmured. "And if he's here, the others will come." Her voice dropped even lower. "We can't stay in this chamber. They'll find us." She slipped an arm under his, helping him stand despite his protest. His vision swam from the effort. But she didn't slow down. They left the chamber, moving through narrow passages where the walls seemed to close in. Daniel could feel the tension in her body. With every step, she knew these halls, but now they were dangerous in ways even she hadn't expected. Every sound, the creak of old stone, the faint drip of water, the whisper of shifting dust felt sharper. Somewhere ahead, the ruins opened into another section. But Daniel could sense this was no escape. He didn't know if it was his instincts or the look in her eyes, but he knew they were walking deeper into danger. And whatever waited ahead might be worse than the trap that had nearly killed him. The corridor twisted like the inside of a serpent. Damn stone walls pressing close on both sides. Lyra's lantern cast trembling shadows that seemed to follow them. Daniel leaned on her for balance, his breath heavy. The pain in his side pulsed with every step, but he stayed quiet. He didn't want her to think he couldn't go on. They reached a section where the floor dipped downward, water pooling in shallow, murky patches. The air here was colder, carrying a strange metallic scent. Lyra slowed, her gaze fixed on the far end where the hall opened into a wider space. Daniel could feel her hesitation. "What's wrong?" he whispered. She didn't answer. Instead, she knelt and touched the wet floor, her fingers coming away with a faint blue glow. "That's not water," she murmured. "It's residue from the guardian blades." Daniel didn't like the sound of that. He adjusted his grip on his pistol, scanning the darkness ahead. A low hum began to rise from somewhere beyond the hall. It was steady, mechanical, and growing louder. Lyra's expression tightened. "We have to move fast," she said. They stepped forward, trying to keep their boots from splashing too loudly. The hum deepened into a vibrating growl. Daniel caught movement ahead, a shimmer in the air, like heat waves. Then, out of nothing, 3 spinning metal blades appeared, each the size of a shield. They hovered in place for a moment before slicing through the air toward them. Lyra pulled him sideways, pressing his back against the wall. The first blade spun past so close it cut a few strands of her hair. The second and third followed, bouncing off the stone and coming back around like predators circling prey. Daniel's instincts kicked in. He fired his pistol at the nearest one. The shot sparked off the blade, doing nothing. "They're too strong," Lyra said, her voice urgent. "We have to trick them, not fight them." She pulled a small sphere from her belt, twisted it, and tossed it toward the opposite wall. The sphere cracked open, spilling a glowing dust into the air. The blades immediately turned toward the light, slicing into the wall where the dust floated. "Go, now," she shouted. Daniel didn't argue. They ran through the open space, the blades slashing just inches behind them. The hum grew frantic, the sound of metal against stone ringing in Daniel's ears. They dove through a narrow archway, and the blades stopped, unable to follow. Daniel collapsed against the wall, breathing hard. His side burned, but he was alive. Lyra knelt in front of him, checking his wound again. Her hands were steady now, but her eyes showed something else, a shadow of worry. "We can't keep this pace," he said quietly. She shook her head. "We have to. The deeper we go, the more dangerous it gets. And if my brother's already here—" Her words trailed off. But he understood. They pressed on, the air growing warmer as they descended. The walls changed from rough stone to smooth black metal, faintly humming with power. It felt alive. Like the fortress itself was watching Daniel's. Every step made him more aware that they were far from safe. Lyra moved ahead, her movements careful, scanning for traps in the next chamber. A wide circular room, the ceiling was high and arched. A strange glow lit the edges, casting long shadows. In the center was a raised platform with an object resting. On a crystal the size of a fist, pulsing with soft light, Daniel recognized it immediately. "That's it?" he asked. Lyra nodded. The crystal of Aaron. Her voice was almost reverent. But Daniel's eyes weren't on the crystal. They were on the figure standing behind it. The same tall, masked alien from before. His posture was relaxed, almost amused. "You made it this far, little sister," the stranger said, his voice carrying easily in the echoing chamber. "And your human pet still lives." Impressive. Daniel felt Lyra stiffen, but she stepped forward. "Give me the crystal," she demanded. The figure tilted his head. "You know the price," he replied. "And you know I'll never give it to you without it." His gaze shifted to Daniel. And even through the mask, Daniel could feel the weight of it. Something cold slid into Daniel's stomach. The way the masked figure looked at him, it wasn't just hostility, it was possession. As if Daniel was already a part of some plan. Lyra's hand moved toward her dagger, but she didn't draw it yet. The tension between them hung thick in the air. The hum of the crystal grew louder, almost like it was responding to their presence. Daniel's instincts told him that whatever happened next would decide whether they left this place alive. And as he met the masked figure's gaze, he realized one thing: this wasn't going to be a fight they could win by force alone. The silence in the chamber felt heavier than stone. Lyra stood perfectly still, her eyes locked on the masked figure. Daniel could see her chest rising and falling faster. But her voice stayed steady when she spoke. "You have no claim to it. It belongs to me." The figure gave a slow shake of his head. "It belongs to whoever has the will to take it." Daniel's hand tightened around his pistol. He didn't trust the man's calm tone, and he trusted even less the fact that he hadn't attacked yet. The crystal between them pulsed, its light reflecting on the metal walls. The hum had grown deep enough to be felt in his bones. Lyra took a step forward, but the masked figure raised his hand. From the shadows on both sides of the chamber, armed aliens stepped out. Their weapons were long and curved, designed for close killing. Daniel counted at least 6. His stomach turned. This was a trap from the beginning. The masked figure's voice carried a sharp edge. "Now, you should never have come here, little sister. You've brought trouble into a place that should have been ours alone." Lyra's jaw tightened. "You mean you wanted this crystal for yourself? You'd rather see our people die than share it." Her brother, because Daniel knew now that's who he was, let out a humorless laugh. "Our people will live. But they will live under my rule. The sickness will end, but so will weakness." Daniel didn't like the way those words sounded. He shifted his weight, his injury flaring with pain, but he kept his pistol low and ready. Lyra glanced at him for only a second, but it was enough. He understood she had no intention of walking out without the crystal. And she also wasn't going to hand him over. The brother stepped toward her, holding the crystal in one hand. The guards moved closer, their boots clicking against the smooth floor. Daniel's mind raced. There were too many to fight head-on. The only way out was to break their formation. Lyra moved first. Her dagger flashed in the crystal's light as she lunged. She didn't go for her brother, but for the guard closest to her. The blade caught him in the side, and he collapsed with a cry. Daniel fired at another, the shot echoing off the chamber walls. The guard fell back, clutching his chest. The brother reacted instantly, hurling the crystal to the far side of the room. It rolled toward the edge of the platform, glowing brighter. 2 guards broke away to chase it, and that was the opening Daniel needed. He shoved himself forward despite the pain, firing again to force the remaining guards back. Lyra kicked one of the guards away and ran for the crystal. Her brother intercepted her, their blades clashing. Sparks jumped into the air. Daniel kept firing, but his shots couldn't get through the spinning chaos of their fight. Lyra ducked under a swing, came up close, and slammed her shoulder into him, sending him stumbling. She grabbed the crystal and sprinted toward Daniel. But her brother's voice rang out, "Seal the exits." Heavy doors began sliding down from the walls, grinding into place. Daniel's heart pounded. They had seconds before they were trapped. He grabbed Lyra's arm and pulled her toward the narrow passage they had entered from. A guard lunged at them, but Daniel slammed the butt of his pistol into the alien's face. The guard dropped, blood spraying. Lyra didn't look back as they ran. The crystal clutched tightly in her hand. The passage was closing fast. The grinding of the metal door filled Daniel's ears. His side burned as he pushed himself harder. They dove under the narrowing gap just before it sealed with a final, echoing slam. The air on the other side was colder, and the dim light made everything look sharper. They didn't stop running until the sounds of pursuit faded. Lyra, finally, slowed, leaning against the wall. Her breaths came in quick bursts. Daniel leaned beside her, his own chest heaving. "That was your brother," he said, not as a question. She nodded, her eyes not meeting his. "He's been planning this for years. He wants control, not healing." Daniel studied her, and now he's coming after us with everything he's got. She didn't answer. But the way her hands tightened around the crystal was enough. The danger wasn't over. It was only getting worse. Somewhere deep in the fortress, a low rumble began. Dust drifted down from the ceiling. The walls seemed to tremble under their weight. Lyra looked at him sharply. "We need to get out before the whole place collapses." Daniel nodded, but he could see in her face that she was thinking about more than the collapsing ruins. She was thinking about her brother and about what she might have to do to stop him for good. The ground shook beneath their feet as they ran, small stones rolling across the floor with each tremor. Somewhere behind them, the deep rumble grew into a roar. Like the fortress itself was groaning in pain. Lyra kept the crystal clutched tightly to her chest, her eyes darting left and right for any path that wasn't blocked. Daniel followed close, his injuries screaming with every step, but the thought of slowing down wasn't an option. The narrow hallway twisted into a wider space lit by faint orange light. The glow wasn't from torches, Daniel realized, but from cracks in the walls where molten rock seeped through, dripping in slow, glowing streams. Heat wrapped around them, making the air thick and heavy. The fortress wasn't just collapsing, it was burning from the inside. A deafening crash echoed from behind, and a section of the ceiling caved in, filling the air with dust. Through the haze, shadows moved, figures, armed and advancing. Lyra's brother's voice carried over the noise, calm but filled with command. "Bring me the crystal and kill the human." Daniel's stomach tightened. Lyra didn't look back, but her grip on the crystal hardened. "This way," she shouted. Pointing toward a half-collapsed archway, they darted through, the sound of boots and weapons following close. The passage sloped downward, and every step took them deeper into heat and smoke. A sudden blast of fire erupted from the wall ahead, forcing them to stop. Daniel coughed, his eyes watering. The flames subsided just enough for them to see the source, a cracked pipe spilling burning gas. Lyra pulled a small device from her belt and tossed it toward the leak. The device burst into a cloud of freezing mist, sealing the gas for a moment. "Go," she yelled. They pushed forward, the rumbling above growing louder. Daniel could hear sections of the fortress giving way. stone smashing against stone. A chunk of the ceiling fell close enough to graze his shoulder, the impact knocking him sideways. Lyra grabbed him before he could fall, pulling him back to his feet. Another turn, and the hallway opened into a massive chamber lit by the glow of fire and molten streams. The floor was uneven, split by cracks that oozed heat on the far side. Daniel could see and exit a wide stone arch leading to what looked like daylight, but between them and freedom stood 3 of the brothers' guards, their weapons ready. Lyra didn't hesitate. She lunged at the closest one, her dagger flashing. In the firelight, Daniel raised his pistol, firing at the second the shot struck true, dropping the guard instantly. The third came at Daniel with a curved blade, and pain exploded in his side as he twisted to avoid the strike. He slammed the pistol across the alien's face, sending him reeling before firing a final shot. The path was clear, but the rumble above turned into a sharp crack. Daniel looked up to see a massive beam breaking free from the ceiling. It fell toward Lyra, and without thinking, he threw himself forward, shoving her clear. The beam slammed into his back, knocking him to the ground. White-hot pain tore through him, and his breath left in a harsh gasp. Lyra was at his side in an instant, her hands trying to lift the beam. "No, Daniel, get up. You have to get up." He pushed weakly against the stone, his vision swimming. "Go. Take the crystal." "Get out," he said. But she shook her head violently. "Not without you." Her voice cracked with a final burst of effort. She levered the beam just enough for him to crawl free. The heat from the molten cracks burned against his skin as she pulled him to his feet. They staggered together toward the archway, the roar of collapsing stone chasing them. They broke into the open air just as the fortress behind them gave a final, earth-shaking groan. The ground shook so hard Daniel nearly fell. A massive section of the ruins collapsed in on itself, sending a wave of dust and heat rolling out. They stumbled down the rocky slope away from the structure until they were far enough to breathe without choking. Daniel collapsed to one knee. Clutching his side, Lyra dropped beside him, her hands still gripping the crystal. Her face was streaked with sweat and soot, but her eyes were fierce. "We're not safe yet," she said between breaths. "He's still alive. And he'll come for us." Daniel nodded, his chest heaving. "Then we'll be ready," he said. Somewhere in the distance, carried on the hot wind, came the faint sound of boots striking stone. The pursuit wasn't over, and the battle for the crystal and their lives was far from finished. They reached the edge of the cliff just as the sun dipped low behind the jagged mountains. The air was thin and cold here, a sharp contrast to the burning ruins behind them. Lyra held the crystal tightly, her eyes scanning the rocky ground below for a way down. But their enemies were closing fast, the sound of heavy footsteps echoing against stone. Daniel stood in front of her, despite the pain racking his body. His hand rested on his pistol, ready to fight whatever came next. Lyra's breath caught when she saw the small group of soldiers rounding the bend. Their weapons were raised, faces grim with purpose. The brother's voice carried clearly over the wind. "Give me the crystal, or die here." Lyra shook her head, her voice steady but fierce. "You won't have it." Daniel moved beside her, his stance protective. "We'll fight if we have to." The soldiers stopped a few meters away, forming a loose circle, their eyes flicking between the two. Suddenly, Daniel raised his pistol and fired a warning shot into the air. The sharp crack made the soldiers flinch, but they didn't back down. Instead, one stepped forward, blade gleaming in the fading light. "This ends now," he said coldly. Lyra drew her dagger. The metal catching the last rays of sun, the ground between them became a battlefield. Daniel's pain almost forgotten as adrenaline surged through his veins. He blocked a strike aimed at Lyra. Twisting to avoid a second blow, she moved like water, fast and sure, her dagger finding gaps in their defense. But the numbers were against them, and their enemies pressed closer. From behind, a sudden shout alerted them. Reinforcements. Lyra's allies peered at the cliff's edge, weapons raised. Their arrival forced the soldiers to hesitate. Unsure whether to fight or flee, Lyra took the chance, grabbing Daniel's arm. "We have to move now," she urged. They ran toward the new fighters, but Daniel stumbled. The weight of his wounds slowing him, Lyra dropped the crystal into his hand. "Keep this safe," she whispered fiercely. "I'll cover you." She turned back to face the soldiers, standing tall despite her exhaustion as Daniel moved with the others. He looked back to see Lyra standing alone, a shield between him and death. Her figure was a fierce silhouette against the darkening sky. The crystal pulsed softly in his palm, a symbol of hope and sacrifice. They reached a small clearing, bathed in pale moonlight. The air cool and quiet except for the soft sounds of the forest around them. Daniel's breath came in ragged gasps. Pain sharp in his side, but fading under relief. Lyra sat beside him, her hand gently holding his, her eyes searching his face as if to make sure he was truly there. The crystal rested between them, its soft light glowing like a promise. Daniel looked up at her, the weight of everything they had survived pressing on his chest. He remembered the traps, the fight, the fire, and the moments when he thought he would die. Yet here he was, alive because of her courage and his own stubborn will. Lyra's voice was quiet but steady. "The crystal is destroyed," she said. "My brother's war plans are over." Daniel smiled weakly. "Worth every pain," he whispered. She squeezed his hand, a soft smile breaking through her tired eyes. "You saved more than my people," she said. "You saved me." The forest seemed to breathe around them, shadows dancing with the moonlight. Daniel reached up to brush a stray lock of hair from her face. The moment felt fragile and sacred. A stillness after the storm. Neither spoke for a while, just holding on to the fact that they had made it through. In the distance, the faint sound of approaching footsteps stirred the quiet. Reinforcements from their allies coming to take them home. Daniel tightened his grip on Lyra's hand, knowing the battle was over, but their journey was just beginning. She looked at him, eyes shining with something new, hope, trust, and maybe something deeper. "You were worth every pain," she repeated softly, and Daniel knew he would do it all again without hesitation.